All right, everyone, get ready for a real brain workout today.
Yeah.
We're diving into the depths of Kant's critique of pure reason.
Yeah, this one is a classic.
Definitely a heavyweight in the world of philosophy. I mean, I'll admit, cracking open the critique can feel a bit like trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops.
Yeah, I could see that.
But fear not, intrepid listeners. We're here to be your trusty Sherpas. We'll guide you through the treacherous terrain, unpack the complex ideas, and hopefully make the journey both enlightening and, dare I say, enjoyable.
That's our goal, for sure. And what makes this deep dive so fascinating is that Kant's critique is really like, well, it's like a philosophical detective story. He's on this quest to figure out the limits of what we can actually know for sure.
Oh, I like that. So it's about setting the boundaries of human knowledge, like drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is what we can know, and beyond this, it's anyone's guess.
Precisely. Before Kant came along, metaphysics, which is the study of the nature of reality, all the big questions, it was a bit of a free-for-all. Philosophers were making these grand claims about God, the soul, the universe.
But without a solid way to back those claims up.
Exactly, like building a house on a foundation of sand. So Kant comes in and says, hold on, we need a system here. We need a way to figure out what our minds can truly know, independent of our experiences.
So he was looking for the bedrock, the unshakable foundation of knowledge.
Yes, he called it a priori knowledge, the stuff we know intuitively, without needing specific experiences to prove it.
Okay, so give us an example of a priori knowledge.
Well, think about something like mathematics. The fact that 1 + 1 = 2, that's not something you learn through experience, right? You just kind of get it. It's intuitive.
It's like it's built into our brain somehow.
Exactly. And Kant was fascinated by this. He believed that by understanding a priori knowledge, we could unlock the secrets of how our minds construct our reality. It's a really deep question when you think about it. Is our knowledge just a hodgepodge of sensory experiences, or do we come pre-programmed with certain ways of understanding the world?
So it's like asking, are we born blank slates, or do we come with some pre-installed software?
That's a great way to put it. And Kant argues that we do come with pre-installed software. He calls these innate structures the forms of intuition and the categories of understanding.
All right, hold on. Those terms sound a bit intimidating. Before we go any further, let's break those down. What exactly are these forms of intuition and categories of understanding, and how do they shape our understanding of the world? Okay, so we're digging deeper into these mental structures that Kant says shape our reality. These forms of intuition and the categories of understanding. Where do we even begin with all this?
Well, let's start with those forms of intuition. Basically, Kant says that space and time, they're not objective realities that exist out there in the world, like we tend to think.
Okay.
Instead, he argues they're actually fundamental ways that our minds organize experience. They're like the operating system of our perception.
So no matter what we're experiencing, our minds automatically filter it through this lens of space and time.
Exactly. We can't even imagine experiencing the world without space and time because they're so fundamental to how our minds work. It'd be like, imagine trying to describe a color you've never seen before.
It's impossible.
Exactly. Your visual processing system just isn't wired for it.
Right.
So it's similar with space and time. They're like the very fabric of our experience.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But remind me again how this connects to that a priori knowledge we were talking about earlier.
Good question. Well, Kant says these forms of intuition, space and time, they allow us to make judgments about the world that are both synthetic and a priori.
Wait, hold on. Back up a bit for us. What's a synthetic judgment again?
Oh, right. Good point. A synthetic judgment, it's basically a judgment that adds new information to a concept. It's not just stating something that's already contained in the definition.
Okay, so it's not just stating the obvious. It's adding something new to the equation.
Exactly.
Okay, so give us an example then of a judgment that's both synthetic and a priori, meaning it's adding new information, but we somehow know it's true without needing any specific experience to prove it.
Okay, how about this? The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line.
Okay.
So that statement, it's not just a definition of a straight line.
Right.
It's telling us something new and meaningful about the very nature of space itself. And we can grasp the truth of that statement intuitively without having to actually go out and measure every single line in the universe.
That's pretty wild when you think about it that way. It's like our intuition, guided by these, what do you call them, forms. It's like they're giving us a shortcut to knowledge.
Precisely. And that's just one example. Kant argued that a lot of mathematics, especially geometry, it's built upon these synthetic a priori judgments about space and time.
Okay, my mind is officially blown, But what about those other mental structures you mentioned, the categories of understanding? What's their role in all of this?
Right. So if you think of the forms of intuition, like space and time, as the operating system of our perception,
Okay.
the categories of understanding are like these pre-installed apps that we use to actually make sense of the data.
Apps, huh? I like that.
Yeah, so these categories, things like substance, causality, unity, they're like mental filters that take the raw data of our senses and organize it into a coherent and meaningful picture of the world.
So it's like our minds automatically categorize things as objects with properties, events with causes, and so on. And we don't even realize it's happening.
Exactly. We instinctively understand that every event must have a cause, even if we haven't personally witnessed every cause and effect relationship in the universe. Like, you know that if you drop a glass, it'll fall and probably break. You don't need to have dropped every single glass in the world to understand that.
Right, it just makes sense.
Exactly.
So are you saying that these categories of understanding, along with the forms of intuition, are shaping how we experience and make sense of the world around us?
Uh,
Constantly and sort of behind the scenes.
Precisely. And for Kant, this leads to a really crucial distinction between the world as appears to us, what he calls the phenomenal world, and the world as it truly is in itself, the noumenal world.
Okay, that sounds like a big distinction. What's the difference between those two, this phenomenal and noumenal world?
Yep.
And how does that relate to everything else we've been talking about?
All right, so we've been carefully constructing this intricate picture of how our minds work with these forms of intuition, like space and time, and those categories of understanding, like substance and causality.
Quite a framework, isn't it?
It is. But now we're getting to this idea of a phenomenal world versus a noumenal world. And I'll admit, this is where things start to get really slippery for me.
It's a crucial distinction in Kant's philosophy, that's for sure.
So help us understand it. What's the difference between these two worlds? Okay, so the phenomenal world, that's the world as it appears to us. It's the world we experience every day, but it's filtered through our senses and interpreted by our minds, shaped by those very forms of intuition and categories of understanding we've been discussing.
So it's our own personal subjective reality. It's how each of us perceives and makes sense of things based on our own individual mental frameworks.
Exactly. Now, the noumenal world, on the other hand, that's the world as it truly is in itself, independent of our minds, independent of our senses, independent of our perception. It's that raw, unfiltered reality that exists beyond our limited human experience.
Okay, so the noumenal world is like this ultimate objective reality, the thing in itself, as Kant calls it.
Yes.
But here's the thing. If our perception is always filtered through our own mental structures, those forms of intuition, those categories, how can we ever access this noumenal world? Can we even truly know it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Kant's answer might surprise you. He argues that we can't directly access the noumenal world. Our minds, powerful as they are, they're simply not equipped for that.
Because we're always trapped in the phenomenal realm.
In a way, yes. Remember those categories of understanding. They're incredibly useful tools for navigating the phenomenal world, the world of experience. But when we try to take those tools and apply them to the noumenal world, that's when things get messy.
So it's like trying to use a map that's designed for navigating city streets to try to navigate, like, the vast wilderness.
Perfect analogy. The tools just aren't designed for that kind of exploration.
Right, right.
And this is where we run into those mind-bending antinomies that we touched on earlier.
Right. So these antinomies, remind us again, what are they exactly?
Well, they're essentially pairs of contradictory arguments that seem equally valid when we try to apply our reason to this noumenal realm.
Okay, so it's like our reason is short-circuiting a bit when it tries to grapple with something so far beyond its grasp.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
So let's dig into one of these antinomies to make this a little more concrete.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier the antinomy of freedom versus determinism. And I think that's something we can all relate to in our own lives, right? This feeling of, am I really in control or is everything predetermined?
Absolutely. It's a classic philosophical dilemma.
So how does this antinomy, this freedom versus determinism, how does it illustrate the limits of our reason when we're trying to deal with this noumenal world?
Okay, so on the one hand, we have this deep-seated feeling of free will. We make choices every day, and we experience the consequences of those choices. It feels very real, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I mean, it'd be
Right.
pretty hard to get through life without some concept of free will.
Right. But then on the other hand, we can look around at the world, and what do we see? This intricate web of cause and effect. Every event, it seems to be determined by a chain of events that came before it, stretching all the way back to the beginning of, well, everything.
So we're caught in this paradox. We feel free, yet we see evidence of determinism everywhere we look. It's enough to make your head spin.
It is. And this is where Kant steps in and says, hey, this antinomy, this seemingly impossible contradiction, it only arises because we're trying to take this category of causality, which is a tool we use to understand the phenomenal experience-based world,
Okay.
and we're trying to apply it to the noumenal realm, the realm of things in themselves. And that's where we get into trouble.
So, again, we're using the wrong tool for the job.
Precisely. We're trying to measure something immeasurable with the tools that we have at hand. Kant's point is that we can think about ourselves as both free and determined, but these concepts, they exist on different levels of reality. In the phenomenal world, we are subject to the laws of nature, to cause and effect. But in the noumenal realm, in that realm beyond our direct experience, freedom might be possible. We simply can't know for sure.
So that's a lot to wrap our heads around, but I think I'm getting it. We may never be able to fully grasp that noumenal world, but just understanding that it exists and recognizing the inherent limitations of our own reason when trying to grasp it, that's incredibly valuable in itself.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Kant's philosophy. He's not trying to give us all the definitive answers to these big, unanswerable questions about the universe and our place in it.
Right.
Instead, he's giving us a framework for thinking about these questions, for questioning our assumptions, for recognizing the awesome power of human reason, but also its inherent limitations.
It's humbling. It is.
It's also incredibly liberating.
I can see that. So, as we begin to wrap things up, I'm wondering what you think all of this means for us today in a world that's grappling with such complex issues like artificial intelligence, the nature of consciousness, and the limits of scientific knowledge. It seems like Kant's ideas are more relevant than ever.
Oh, absolutely. In this age of information overload and constant technological advancement, it's absolutely crucial to be critical thinkers, to question our assumptions about what we think we know, and to recognize that there are still these vast realms of knowledge that lie beyond our grasp.
It's both a humbling and an exciting thought, isn't it? Even if we can't know everything, we can still strive to understand the world and our place in it a little bit more deeply. And that's the true legacy of Kant's critique of pure reason, wouldn't you say?
Beautifully put. It encourages us to keep asking those big questions, to keep pushing the boundaries of our understanding, and to embrace the mystery and wonder of it all.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the brilliant and often baffling mind of Immanuel Kant.
It's been my pleasure.
We hope you've come away from this with a deeper appreciation for the power and, yes, the limits of human reason. Until next time, keep those philosophical wheels turning.